How did the American right wing destroy the United States of America? There is not one answer. And I've talked about parts of this before. If you go back to my interview with Noam Chomsky, we actually discuss a bunch of this story. But there are some additional layers I want to add. We have a lot of new viewers who haven't heard me talk about this before, and particularly because next we're going to talk about Project 2025 and Agenda 47, much requested by dozens of you. I finally had time to look at it, and we're going to discuss it. In order to set us up to discuss Project 2025, we have to talk about how we got to where we are. And by how we got to where we are, what I'm talking about is a level of extremism, pride in ignorance, reactionary authoritarian populism. And yes, MAGA Trumpism is certainly a part of that, but MAGA Trumpism didn't just arise out of nowhere, and this is the important sort of trajectory to understand. So the story I've told you before includes probably a starting point around the civil rights era. Now, we could even go back before this, but when the right talks about going back to the way things used to be, generally speaking, they're talking about the early to mid 1950s before the start of the civil rights era in 58, 59. The first step in all of this, and how are we going to get to Trump from this? Well, we will. The first step in all of this was the rise of the civil rights era in the late 50s into the early to mid 60s and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, starting to generate this idea that the non-white population is getting better treatment. Now, that's not new. That they're using it now, but that is not new, and that goes all the way back to the civil rights era. That and antipathy about so-called welfare queens and lazy immigrants just handing out, living off of the government dole, got us to Reagan. Reagan used many of those stories in campaigning. The welfare queen with the Cadillac who was popping out kids to get rich. That story, that woman, by the way, didn't exist, not specifically anyway. Those civil rights antipathies led to Reagan and Reagan's rise and a significant sort of stupidization of the American right wing. That eventually got us to Bill Clinton's defeat of George H.W. Bush in 1992, and this brought out yet another rise. How is this Southern white governor, Bill Clinton, going to do us so wrong? Even though, in retrospect, many of the things that Bill Clinton did were certainly relatively moderate by modern standards, certainly no progressive by 2023 standards. The reaction to Clinton in 92 led to a major victory for Republicans in the House of Representatives in 1994, and Newt Gingrich, sort of the first Bush sort of modern style right-wing Republican, really coming to power. Newt Gingrich became Speaker of the House. And at that point, we saw a true, they love to talk about the weaponization of government against people you disagree with. Newt Gingrich's 1994 House of Representatives is probably the first really good example of a Republican Party, or any major party, happened to be Republican Party, determined to weaponize every tool they have against someone they don't like. In that particular case, it was Bill Clinton. This led to investigations into Bill Clinton, digging into Bill Clinton's personal life even more than we saw during the 1992 campaign, and on and on and on. A sort of Clinton derangement syndrome. Then we get to George W. Bush. George W. Bush was notable in this entire sort of breaking of the American culture by the right wing, because George W. Bush was the first time in the modern political era. I'm trying to be careful and precise with my words. George W. Bush was the, hey, you don't like to read? You don't like to think? Don't worry about it. These left-wingers are crazy. College is indoctrination. Come with me. I'm sort of dim, and you might be sort of dim on purpose, and we're all going to be great and dim together because anything else is just far left stuff. And so that opened the door to then seeing Sarah Palin as the really doofy running mate of John McCain in 2008. So the Republican Party continued to move in this direction of thinking is bad, being articulate and nuanced and thoughtful, intellectual, God forbid. That's all bad. Now, it didn't work for them. Sarah Palin was a disastrous vice presidential running mate for John McCain. Barack Obama won. And this now unleashed the next level, which was wild and crazy, unabashed racism. Obama becoming president didn't create racism, but it started to go in the direction of, hey, the president is now black, half black, but remember, societally seen as black. And so now we really got to do something about this problem. The dim-witted nature of the George W. Bush follower was then weaponized and targeted by Barack Obama being a black man in society. All of that then got us to a situation where Trump, who was going to welcome and embrace this sort of extremist, xenophobic thinking and saying, hey, you can say this stuff out in public. We've been silenced for too long. That's how all of that path ultimately got us to Trump. And so to understand Trump, you do have to go all the way back to the civil rights era of the late 1950s. Now, I've told that story before, but that's not all there is to it. We have to add layers that overlap with the political changes that I just discussed. And this is of critical importance to understand, particularly as we think about 2024, 2025. The judiciary becoming more and more extreme, and the Supreme Court becoming a tool of the right, ceding power to corporations and pushing right-wing social agenda, culminating in the elimination or rollback of Roe v. Wade recently. That is another arc, another layer we have to place on top of this stupidization of the United States of America. Campaign finance can't be ignored. Super PACs and dark money and effectively unlimited spending on campaigns through those organizations. A boon for the right, who has billionaires cynically supporting whoever will ultimately just be better for their personal financial interests. The campaign finance layer has to be added on top of it. To some degree, we have to say also an economy based on preferring cheap stuff from China and offshoring supply chains to paying more for things manufactured domestically. That's another layer to this that we have to include, where now Trump and others say, oh, we're going to bring manufacturing back. Well, are you? Because as a country, we've made decision after decision that says we prefer the cheap stuff from China, but keep the wages lower here in the United States. And then you have, of course, the cultural stuff. The cultural stuff includes gun culture in the United States, seeing much of the rest of the world as sissies or people whose opinions we don't care about, an American culture that is far less social than cultures in, at minimum, Europe and Latin America, if not other parts of the world, an isolation that happens at the individual level because of how we live, and then dump onto that the massive dump of social media becoming ubiquitous in the early 2010s, and then combine it with a failing education system that's not teaching critical thinking, that's leading to people who fall for obvious fake news and obvious conspiracies and propaganda. So that's like 20 different things. The point I want to make to you, number one, is that when it took this long and so many factors to get us into this mess in the first place, it's not realistic to think that we're going to get out of it quickly. And number two, it should remind us that when we look at Agenda 47 and Project 2025, we shouldn't write it off as an impossibility, because look at how degraded things have become in the last 4, 14, and 40 years. It can get much worse, and that's what we're going to talk about next.